Hello, everyone, and welcome to my virtual classroom of urban design in the Master of the Architecture School of Pescara. And welcome to our invited speaker, Professor René Davids of the University of California in Berkeley. And welcome to the discussants of this lecture, Professor Claudia Trillo, and we will see at 5 o'clock also Sara Vizcaya of the University of Salford, Manchester. And welcome to the students also. For those who don't know, we have established a twinning program within the March program of the Salford University led by Claudia and Sara. Well, this afternoon's program is very rich and articulated, so I would like to proceed very quickly by inviting our director, Professor Lorenzo Vignatti, to say a few words of welcome greetings. Soon after, I will give the floor to our colleagues of the University of Salford and short greetings also. And after my introduction, I will give the microphone to René Davids for his lecture. So please, Lorenzo Vignatti, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Massimo, for organizing this. Thank you, the students, for being part of this event, and thank you, obviously, to René Davids for being our distinguished guest, and Claudia Trillo for being also with us today, this afternoon, as a discussant. Well, let me just say, I just became director. This is my second week as a director, and I'm kind of enjoying the job from one side, but also at the same time, you know, every day there are different things that are coming, right? You know, different problems, different things to resolve, but I think this is part of the job. But part of the job is also these pleasant moments, right? You know, when I can give a little introduction, because this is the most pleasant part of my job, I think. And it's pleasant because we have guests that are away from Pescara. Somehow, if there is something that it's positive about COVID-19, is this thing, is that we can organize a lecture at a distance, right? You know, it will be much better to see you in person, but I can understand the difficulties. I, as a director, I would be very concerned about, you know, paying airfares and all that kind of stuff, right? You know, and so COVID has made earlier did not exist, so has made possible to share and to have guests for a normal course, because you're lecturing to Massimo Angrilli's course, so you're not lecturing to the entire community of students of Pescara. So thank you, René Davids. Thank you for being with us today. I understand you'll be speaking about Santiago de Chile. Well, my mother was from Santiago, so I've never been in Santiago, and this is something that I really regret, but hopefully I will, you know, sometimes I have some cousins there that I kind of know, but for me, Santiago is obviously a place that, you know, brings back the memory of my mother. So it's always pleasant to hear and to you know, and to listen about the city, which I don't know, but I'll be very glad to kind of, you know, know more about it. So I'm thanking René, I'm thanking Claudia, but I also have to thank Massimo, because he's the last to be thanked, but he's doing a really great job, because he has organized for his course a quite beautiful guest lecture concerning different cities in Europe and outside of Europe. And let me just say that I'm going to copy this idea, and in my course that I have in spring in February, starting from February 2021. I will have a series of lectures on cities. I mean, my interest more recently has been about Adriatic and Balkan cities, right? You know, so my area is more restricted, right? You know, to the Balkan region, right? You know, and actually my students will be working on Belgrade. But I think this is a great idea to kind of, you know, offer to our students, you know, an imaginary kind of, you know, visit of one of the cities, but also to listen to people that are very competent and are very knowledgeable about, you know, the stories of these single cities, and are very knowledgeable about the kind of transformations and major moments of these cities. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Go ahead with your own program. I'm going to listen. I'm going to meet a person in a few minutes, but I'll keep the microphone on, and I'm going to listen to your presentation.
Thank you, Lorenzo.
Ciao ragazzi. Ragazzi, spero che abbiate capito qualcosa.
A small percentage of my students speaks English, but maybe they are able to understand. Maybe we can activate the subtitles during the speech. There is a function, Lorenzo, of this beautiful, yes. So now maybe, yes, the subtitles are just appeared in the bottom of the screen. So thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you very much for your welcome greetings. And so I would like to ask Claudia
Sure.
to something. I'm very happy that in this COVID situation we created this twin with our classrooms in architecture and urbanism. She's teaching in Salford University in Manchester, and with Sara Biscaya, they are leading this program on a canal, and we are doing quite the same in our class. So please, Claudia, the floor is yours.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Massimo, for inviting us to this incredible opportunity of listening from René about a case which is of great interest for all of us, and really happy to meet René, even though only on web, but unfortunately these are the constraints in which we are now, and as Professor Lorenzo and Massimo were saying, we are trying to make the most out of this situation, and we have created this sort of virtual twinning to catch up with the lack of possibilities in terms of Erasmus exchange or staff exchange that we were used to do in previous years when I had the honor to lecture in person in Pescara. And it will be with a great pleasure that the Master of Architecture at Salford students and us as a staff will be listening to this keynote lecture on a topic which for us is of great importance, the idea of relating public space, topography, and identity perfectly fits with our way of looking at making architecture in combination with urban design and the landscape. So I'm really keen with all my students. We are grateful for this opportunity, both to Massimo and René. So I don't want to steal any longer. We are really curious because I have never been to Santiago De Chile on my own, but Chile is a country that has grown in our interests. The last Biennale, arranged by Alejandra Aravena, has opened the window on Chile. I still remember that Massimo, it was a few years ago when we met in a Biennale. And you told me, go and have a look at the Biennale Pavilion of Chile, because this year is amazing.
Yeah.
So really, Chile is becoming an incredible case in terms of both architecture and urban design. And this window on Santiago is a great opportunity for us to have a little bit of fresh ideas. So thank you, and keen to listen.
Grazie. Thank you, Claudia, for your words. Okay, now it's your time, René. I will do a short introduction about your profile. René Davids is born and raised in Chile. I'm right?
Yes.
Yeah, and also in the UK. So you did your studies also in the UK, and is an architecture and urban design professor at University of California in Berkeley, and principal of David Skillery Architecture, and a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and he's based in Oakland, California, and gained national and international recognition for innovative design with projects around the country and overseas. Committed to pursuing architecture as a form of design research, David Skillery proceeds from the belief that each project can achieve a unique design synthesis. So I asked for this lecture to René to speak about his native city, Santiago de Chile. I'm very curious about it because I'm very fascinated by this country and I've never been there. And maybe with Lorenzo Vignatti, I will go visit their cousins, his cousins. So, okay, please, René, you can share your screen.
Hold on, sorry. I think it's.
We cannot see you anymore in the
Okay.
screen. You turn off the camera, maybe.
No, I haven't.
No?
I'm trying to share.
Okay.
But it's. Oh, it stopped sharing. Hold on.
Okay, now I see myself.
But you don't see me.
I don't see you, but anyway, I see the PowerPoint behind the.
Oh, you do? But you don't see me.
Behind the screen, the Microsoft screen, I see the PowerPoint.
Okay, but you don't see me.
Now I see the PowerPoint.
But you don't see me.
No. The camera is disappeared. But are you using the web or the app?
I thought I was using the app.
Maybe you are using the web because this app happens when you.
Shall I go back?
No, it doesn't matter. We will see at the slides.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I would like to thank Lorenzo Vignatti for his introduction. I think we'd met before because I remember him speaking about his mother. Yeah. But, and thank you for Claudia Trillo for her interest, and I'm really pleased to meet her. And particularly thanks to you, Massimo. I told you yesterday I thought it was an absolutely fabulous idea, and when you proposed this, and the students are really lucky, I think, to have you. When you proposed this to me, I've never lectured on Santiago, and I was actually really thrilled to do it. So it seemed like an opportunity to go back to my past and reassess it. And I was actually genuinely thrilled. And then I got a little scared, to be honest, too. But I'm sort of thrilled again to be able to do this. And I agree with Lorenzo that this is I mean, it's one of the nice things of COVID to be able to have these connections. So I would like to, oh, I should do full screen, right? And I'm also really happy to be virtually in Pescara and with your students, even though I don't see anybody, but it's thrilling to know that everybody is over there. I know this map is a little confusing. If you look at the black sort of silhouette, you'll see that it's the way Latin America and North America normally depicted. If you look carefully, you'll see that it's reversed as well with a lighter line. And then, so that gives you a good idea of the fact that Santiago is on the same latitude as Atlanta. And if you now look at the European map, which is the one in color, you see that, Santiago is at the level of Amman in Jordan, and that all of Italy is above the latitude Santiago is, and of course, England is even further out. But Santiago actually has a Mediterranean climate. And the reason is these maps are a little confusing as well. But if you look at the map on the right, you'll see that there's a current. Can you see the profile of Latin America? All the rivers are marked, so and some of the topography, it's a little confusing as well. But you see the current, which comes from the Antarctic, and therefore it cools the weather. And in fact, if you ever go to a beach in Santiago, it's very hard to get into the water because it's extremely cold. So you have to be very courageous to, I mean, it's possible. And after a while, it's all right. And then you see on the other side that Chile is at the border of the Nazca Plate. These are earthquake plates, and the South American plate, which is one of the reasons the Andes Mountains are, so it's at an incredibly earthquake-prone line. And so you can see the map of South America here. The darker lines are, or the darker sort of hues are the mountains in South America. If you look carefully, even Brazil and Venezuela, it makes a kind of bowl, the whole of South America. The center is very flat and the edges are very high. And so you can see that Chile, which goes roughly from here to the end, the tip of the mountain, is you hardly see anything other than mountains here. And Santiago is roughly in the middle of the country. It's a very long, I mean, it's most famous, in fact, for its length. And then this is a cross section through Chile at the level of Santiago. And you can see the Andes Mountains to the right here. And then there's another coastal mountain range towards the ocean, the Pacific coast is here. And you can see that Santiago is in a valley between these two mountain ranges. The Andes Mountains at the level of Santiago are particularly high. The Aconcagua, which is the highest mountain in the whole of the Andes Mountains, is very close to Santiago. So actually, to go from Santiago to Argentina on the other side of the Andes is, when I was a kid, was very, very hard because the cars had to go very up high. We're also speaking about a few years ago where the cars had less power, and it was snowing, sleety, and most cars had to return. So here you can see the valley of Santiago. You can see how mountainous the surroundings are. This is a current Google Earth photograph, so it's not as it was when it was founded. And Santiago as well is, this is called the Capac, which was a trail, an Incan trail of the Incan Empire. And Santiago was at the very end of that empire. If you can imagine these trails, as you probably know, the Incans didn't have any horses, so it was all pedestrian. And to walk on the trails, you would stay at certain fortifications, which is what you can see here. That's a fortification close to Santiago. And this is, yes.
Sorry. Can you hide the banner at the bottom of the screen? Can you hide it?
What banner?
There is a banner, stop sharing and hide.
Oh.
Because sometimes, okay, hide, please. Okay. Perfect. Because sometimes it goes above the text.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So this is a map, an indigenous, or the map as the indigenous Valley of Santiago would have been, and you can see these weird lines which look like clouds are actually the mountains. And the valley had sort of indigenous villages that were very small, nothing compared to the indigenous sort of pre-Hispanic architecture you would have found in Peru and actually in most of the rest of Latin America, but mostly in Peru and in Mexico. But it's an important map in a way because it shows you that the roads, which are the brown ones, if you look carefully, they were topographically very sensitive. If you look at the trails here, they go through the lower parts of the mountains. And it's important because when Santiago was founded by the Spaniards, and you can see an image of what that was then, down below is the Mapocho River, which you'll encounter again. And at the back, you see the Andes Mountains. And Santiago is named for Santo Giacomo. It's best of my Italian there. St. James in English. And here you see the first map of Santiago, and on the bottom left, you see the Spanish town. And what's important about this is that the others this is the Mapocho River, I already mentioned, which goes all along here. And as you see, the Spanish town is a grid rune, which has nothing to do with the pre-Hispanic tradition, and that the tradition was very organic, very topographically sensitive, and adjusting to the intricacies of the landscape. And Santiago, like many others or most other Latin American cities, was a gridded city. There were about 300 of the cities which looked like this. You see Caracas here is in the center, is maybe the clearest of the three I'm presenting in terms of what was being done. You would have these blocks around the central plaza, the piazza, Plaza de Armas in Chile, and the plaza was basically a block which wasn't built. And again, I repeat, this is a grid-run city. It's got nothing to do with the sort of topographically sensitive tradition of the indigenous people. And this is intentional. It's the Spanish civilization, the European civilization, imposing what they see as a rational order on the indigenous people. I mean, it's to show them their superior rationale and their superior culture and their superior Catholic culture, to be more precise. So this is the plaza in Santiago now. It's these days it's called Plaza de Armas, but it's gone through a number of names. It's just like the diagram I showed you before. It's one of the blocks is being taken away, and traditionally around the plaza there all the government institutions as well as the cathedral. So the power of the government, in this case, the colonial Spanish government, is located all around the square. And it is the first public space in the country. With the time, the plaza gets changed. You saw that initially it didn't have any trees. It was basically a block without building. Towards the end of the 19th century, it looks like this. And these days, it looks like this. Again, it has trees now, but they're different to the 19th century image I showed you. This was designed by one of my friends called Rodrigo Pérez de Arce. The cathedral is still to the left. The reason he won the competition to design this is that it leaves a space in front of the cathedral, which is reminiscent of the tradition of having nothing there. But of course, sort of if you had nothing there, people couldn't spend much time in the plaza because it gets hot during the summer. And you can see how popular the plaza is. It's actually perhaps the most diverse of all the plazas because the Peruvian immigrant community lives very close to the plaza. So it's a place where you get people from different levels of society and also immigrants coming and I repeat to this day, it's probably the most diverse and the most public of all the public spaces in Santiago. Chile becomes independent in 1818, although it celebrates the independence in 1810, which is when it first was declared, but it doesn't really, or it doesn't win against the Spaniards, the new government, till 1818. The second sort of public space ever created in Santiago is the Alameda. The Alameda is a typology, it's a public typology which emerges in Spain and gets transported into Latin America. It's got poplar trees, which is an álamo in Spanish, and therefore that's why the street is called Alameda. And interestingly, speaking about topography, here you see the River Mapocho, which is the main river going across Santiago, and it had a branch called La Cañada, which is, it gets dried out. It never had a lot of water anyway. It gets dried out and it becomes actually the Alameda. And it's important in that it's actually the main street even today of Santiago, both the Alameda and its extensions, both east and west. What you see here is the Plaza de Armas. As you can see, it's the one block, which is, as I was saying, not built. And then what you see in green is the Cerro Santa Lucia, which I'll speak soon about as well. The Alameda then becomes a very important public space. You can see here they're celebrating the 18th of September, which is the Chilean national holiday, and they're dancing the cueca, which is a folk dance, and it's the national Chilean dance. here is the Alameda, and you can see how it becomes a really important street. It still has trees. That's the old Alameda. This is how the image below, how it gets transformed. This is the Alameda in the 30s. It becomes a grand avenue. And this is still the Alameda. This image is taken a year ago. And it's, as you can see, at the end, you can see the Andes, the Mapocho River to the left. So the next public space I'm going to speak about is called the Quinta Normal. You can see on this map, you can see the Mapocho again. And I just spoke about the Cerro Santa Lucia, which is here. So this is the Alameda here. This is called the foundational triangle, the Mapocho and the Alameda. Keep it in mind because as I show other images, it will come up again and again. The Quinta Normal, which is the yellow square I'm showing, is the next important public space built in Santiago. And again, it has a relationship to nature in that it was initially built as an agricultural research area. And the idea was to try to find and record urban landscapes which were devoid of any Spanish and religious traces. So it was almost like an anti-colonial enterprise, not just an agricultural research area. And Luigi Sada Di Carlo, there's an Italian connection here, which I think
a good one.
What?
A good one, I hope.
Yes, very good one. He actually transforms this research area into a public space. So you can see it here. And this is the image, what it looks like today. And then it gets transformed. It got transformed about 10 years ago by another friend of mine called Theo Fernandez, which is an architect, but has also done many of the sort of public landscape projects in Santiago. You can see the design of the seats, somewhat influenced by Burle Marx. And this is the lagoon in the center. The third so public space built in Santiago, these are images of 1895, but the Parque Cauciño was built in the 1870s. You can see it down here, and up here is what I've called the foundational triangle, which you should keep in mind because it'll keep helping to orient yourself in relation to Santiago. So this is what it looks like from the air. In the 1870s, that's roughly 50 years after the independence of the country. The country is still obsessed with sort of finding its own identity and looking at Europe and particularly at France, not just Europe in general, as the country to emulate and to try to, in a way, compare itself to or even be better than. So you're looking at an image of the park, which is trying to emulate the Bois de Boulogne. On the top, you see an image of the Bois de Boulogne, and on the bottom, you see the Parque Cauciño, which today is called Parque O'Higgins. And I think the similarities are pretty obvious. So Santiago was trying to set up its identity through and its non-Spanish identity above it all. And this becomes continues to be a very important public space in Santiago. It's where the military parades take place for the 18th of September, which is the national holiday. And it's also where, again, the cueca, I mentioned it before in relation to the Alameda, which is the national folkloric dance, takes place under these hats you see in the image here. And here you get an image of this dance. It's done with a handkerchief, which you see the female and the male have a handkerchief. Scholars have claimed that the public space was located in such a way as to front the Andes Mountains. I don't have an image of the Andes Mountains of the time, so I presented one. This is Santiago today. You can see the Andes Mountains at the back, and this is the kind of view you would have gotten from the Parque Cauciño or the Parque O'Higgins at the time. So it was, on the one hand, the relationship to the Bois de Boulogne in France, on the one hand, and the relationship, the view to what obviously was absolutely part of the country. The Andes go from the very top to the end, and basically, because the country is as narrow as it is, almost defines every single landscape in the country. So you can see here another view, this time looking west, and down below on the bottom, you can see the lake I was showing to you before. And this oval here is where, as I was saying before, the military parades happen. And also for the 18th of September, the celebrations, although the celebrations all over Santiago, not just the space, but this is one of the main spaces where the celebrations take place. And then what you see here is this little mound here is the Cerro Santa Lucia, which is the next space I'm going to speak about. So this green and the oval are the Parque Cauciño. The next little piece of green here is called the Cerro Santa Lucia. And this was the Cerro Santa Lucia, as you can see here, was a hill, a very rocky hill, which again in the 1870s, 50 years after the country was founded as an independent country, was a very rocky hill. It was used by vagrants. There were also so people which weren't Catholic were buried there. And sometimes the stones would be used for building as well. You can, this is Santiago in the 1870s, and there was a sort of the mayor of Santiago in the 1870s, actually only for 3 years, was a gentleman called Benjamin Vicuña Maquena. He was very influential at all levels, actually, but particularly at the level of urban design. And he decided to transform the hill into a park. So you can see the first image here. The reasons for transforming the hill were, on the one hand, that they thought the heights of this hill would give some people in Santiago a healthy place to be, but the other, and to escape all the illnesses which could or happened at the time. This was true in Europe as well, in cities, particularly in cities like Santiago, which had very wealthy areas, but also areas very poor. And so the transformation, however, and you can see how rocky it is, this is still today, the hill. But the other idea behind the hill was to, again, sort of imitate Paris and also to go high up and look down onto Santiago and sort of amaze yourself with the progress. So there was a kind of obsession with making the city or making this of the independent country and observing how the city could compare with the best of Europe, particularly Paris. It was also very interesting because what, you're having a problem?
No. I'm using the earphone. Okay.
Oh, okay. And there were sort of different types of trays going through the park, which included horse carriage trails as well as stairs. This is still, these images are relatively contemporary. They're my images. And of course, the Butte Chaumont was in this case the park, which was also a fairly rocky park. It had been a quarry in Paris, and it had also been transformed. And this was one of the images Vicuña Maquena, who traveled through Europe, sort of looked at in order to set up his own park. You can see here, it's a very eclectic park and a very rocky park. And it's actually a very special place in Santiago. This is the view of the Cerro Santa Lucia, as you would see it from the Alameda. The Alameda, as I've said before, is the main thoroughfare going east to west in Santiago. And here at the first hill, here you can see here is the Cerro Santa Lucia, obviously on a much more contemporary image. The Plaza de Armas would be here. I think this is, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where it is. So you can see that the hill, as compared to the earlier images I showed you, the buildings are these days higher than the hill. But if you remember the earlier images, you could go up there and observe the rest of Santiago and how it was progressing. Whilst Vicuña Maquena for the times was a very forward-looking mayor, he was also part of Santiago's elite, and that name, even these days, is still an elite Chilean surname. And so one of the other proposals he made was to create this belt around Santiago. The little green spot here is the Cerro Santa Lucia we just looked at. And the idea of the belt was to establish a difference with what he considered to be the proper Santiago. Actually, that white line is the Mapocho River. What he considered to be the proper city, that is the city of the bourgeoisie, or the wealthy city, his own city, if you like, and whatever was outside the belt was for the riffraff, the poor people. And like the rest of Latin America, most of the elite would be of European origin, mainly Spanish, but also others, like Maquena is actually an Irish name, so but obviously European, and the people outside the belt was not necessarily pure indigenous, would have traces of indigenous blood in their bodies, and to this day, I think if you went to Santiago, or any foreigner goes to Santiago, you wouldn't probably see the difference between people who had indigenous traces and those which didn't. But as a kid in Chile, and I don't know how exactly, you learn to distinguish I mean, nobody teaches you, and yet you learn it to trace minimal blood traces of indigenous blood. And the more European you are, the better and higher class and wealthier you're bound to be. If you look at any of the presidents through the history of the country, and any of the ministers for that matter, you would recognize them as totally European. And that's true for the Latin America. In Bolivia, sort of about 10 or 15 years ago, the first indigenous president was elected, and it was a total break with tradition. But that hasn't happened in Chile or in any of the other Latin American countries. And it's a very class-ridden and racist society, although in Chile it's very subtle, it's very difficult to detect for foreigners, was in countries like Peru and Ecuador and Mexico, it's much easier because the indigenous population hasn't mixed in with the European one. The other thing which is really interesting about landscape and the city, as you've seen, all these places, whilst they're looking at Paris on the one hand, they're very much anchored on the Chilean, or specifically Santiago landscape. The Santa Lucia might be similar to areas of Paris, but it's also very distinct. And of course, the Andes are at the back. And here what you're looking at is a diagram of little canals, water canals. Remember the foundational triangle I spoke about is here. And so all the streets would have been irrigated with canals. This is the city of Mendoza, which is on the other side of the Andes. Originally, at the time I was showing you the previous map, this would have been a Chilean city. It then became Argentinian, but if you go and visit it, you'll see that it still has these canals. And it's a city in a desert. It's a very dry area because the Andes mountains stop any humidity or any cold weather coming from the Pacific side. And so what you see on the top is the foundational city off. You can see the grid and the plaza there. I mean, I realize it's quite small. And the rest are creeks which come from the Andes and become acequias, which is canals. It's actually Arabic word, and it became a very popular way of irrigating gardens and agriculture in the south of Spain, which, as you know, for very long was Arabic. And then this tradition moved into Latin America. The next public park I'm going to show is the Cerro, Mount San Cristobal, if you like. today called Parque Metropolitano, which is the yellow line, the blue line being the Rio Mapocho. And once again, it's actually a very large hill. It's like an outpost of the Andes. These days in the middle of Santiago, although as you saw in the previous image at the time, it was towards the edge. And just as the Cerro Santa Lucia, you can see a good part of the hill. It's also a much higher hill, and Santiago on the bottom. It's actually a pretty majestic hill. The reasons for this becoming a park were very similar to the reasons given about the Santa Lucia. It would be a very healthy place. And again, from the top, it would be the place. You can see there's a funicular built at the very beginning to go to the top. So at the very top, you could look down onto the rest of Santiago and see how it was developing. So this sort of strong sense of competition with Europe, a strong sense of trying to establish an identity of its own is also part of why the hill becomes a public park. And in this case, there were actually, there was some similarities with Montjuic in Barcelona and Park Güell in particular, which is also a hill in Barcelona. You can see the architecture has traces of Gaudí, although it's not as exuberant. By this point, it was almost 100 years since the country had become independent, and Spain wasn't a dirty word anymore. The country felt, I guess, secure enough to accept ideas from Spain and not just from France. But for about 100 years, even mentioning the word Spain was like not good. And this is the funicular and the ascent. The person was at Maquena, which was a mayor of Santiago. It's not the same Maquena as, it's not Benjamin Maquena, but it's a member of the family. As I was saying, it's part of the elite. Was very nervous about Santiago becoming similar to La Paz. La Paz is the capital of Bolivia, a country which has always been looked down upon by Chile, again, basically for racist reasons, because it's got a very large indigenous population. And as I've mentioned before, throughout Latin America, that's not looked upon with good eyes, which is in some ways, and apart from the racism, totally absurd thing, because on the one hand, the country is trying to establish the identity of its own, but then in a way it's rejecting the people who are closest to the native population. But this image is important because the same mayor, which is building that park, is also trying to create all these streets based on the French boulevards of Haussmann. So this is the park. You can see a more contemporary image of the park. It's certainly the largest park in Santiago, in Chile, and I believe it might be in Latin America as well. You can see, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. It's a very, very large park. This is an image of, it's a drawing with the sections of the park, and the reddish line is a trail going through the park. There's all sorts of things in the park you can do, from swinging to climbing rocks to, obviously, where we start at the beginning, looking down at Santiago's panorama. Another interesting fact, although it doesn't relate to the topography, is that the blocks, you can see the Plaza de Armas in the center here. The blocks were 100 by 100, 125 meters, very large. And in order to colonize and the center of the city, they started building these passages. This is, we're speaking about the 20s, 30s here. They were actually very elegant. They still exist. This was Santiago at the time, downtown. These are the passages today. So there's a whole network of these passages, which are very public spaces in the city and give it a character of its own. The next space I'm showing you, which also only relates to the landscape in a very indirect way, is the Civic Center. So this is the foundational triangle again. The yellow is the Civic Center. And this is a government palace here, which was the old mint. And if you look carefully at the wide street in the front is the Alameda, once again, and there's a space in front of the government palace. But if you look across it, you see there's nothing, there's just, well, they're residential blocks, but I mean, there's nothing public. This is the Alameda then, a similar image, the government palace, which used to be the mint, and the space in front, the Cerro Santa Lucia here, and the beginning of the Cerro San Cristobal at the back. And again, the image of Paris, this is one of the proposals. You can see the diagonals, the Haussmann diagonals proposed in the 30s. What you see to the right is what was made in the end, this strong axis. The diagonals were never built, but one strong axis was, which is this one here. And you'll see the image on the top is what this civic image looks like. Look at the buildings, they're all the same in order to sort of mark this axis. And here is the mint again. All the buildings around the mint, again, frame the mint, are all the same, and they're government buildings. And then to the other end is this axis. At the other end of the axis originally was going to be the Congress. That never materialized. There was a competition about 5 years ago to find a new finish because the Congress was never built to this public space, which are these two towers you see on the image there. So the government palace would be on this end, and then this is the axis there. So this is, you can see other images of the competition. And what you see here at the end is actually the government palace. And so part of the idea of creating this axis was not just the establishment of a proper civic place for the capital of the country. And again, this sense of identity and through Paris, which the city is trying to establish, but also trying to get rid. If you look, here's the triangle I've been speaking about, the Mapocho River on the top, and these black spots here are called conventillos, which are images like the one you see on the bottom, which is where poor people lived. They look sort of these days, they look sort of picturesque and attractive. But if you can see they were very narrow, and whole families lived in very narrow quarters. So part of the idea of creating this access to the south, which is where all these black spots are, was to once again clean the city of the riffraff of, what wasn't seen as the proper bourgeois city, the city which could compare with Europe. This is where the criminals lived, where the poor people lived, where the illnesses used to happen. So even though it was an attempt to sort of create a big civic monumental space for the city, there were other agendas at play at the same time. You might have heard, although most of the students are too young, but there was a socialist government voted democratically in 1970 in Chile. It's pretty well known. And then in 1973, there was a coup against that government. So the palace, the government palace I'm talking about, is being bombed here because of the coup. I've got a film, but I don't think I have time. We started at about 9:15, right? At about 8.
Yeah. You have time.
Shall I show a bit of the film?
You started at 15 past.
Okay.
5.
Okay, then I'll show a little bit of the film. There is, these are demonstrations happening in Santiago. This is the 11th of September. The president is speaking moments before the palace will be, moments before the palace gets burned. So this is the Alameda there, and I'm sorry, it's in Spanish. These, and so
no problem. The problem is that the video is very.
It's a little grainy. Yeah.
No, but it's
not... actually for those of us who were there at the time. There's a very. This is the president. He commits suicide. They ask him to resign, and he doesn't. Sorry. So this is the bombing of the palace. So that's the palace, and that's the it's actually, for those of us who went through it, it's a very dramatic period in the history of Chile.
At the time you.
I was very young, but I lived in an apartment, and people were shooting on the ground. And we put mattresses against the windows because the people shooting, they were kids. I mean, they were 17, 18 years old. They were terrified of their own lives. So they would start shooting just indiscriminately, and you know, you could get a bullet through the window of your house.
Oh, wow.
So we had the mattresses and floor, and the radio was going on, and yeah, it was very dramatic times.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of the. I'm not sure how to do this. How do I probably like this? No.
To go on with the presentation.
Yeah.
How to get out of this video? Try with ask.
Wait, what? Yeah, I did ask.
The button ask.
Yeah, I'm in ask. Okay. So, and
so now you can go on presentation on
so
full
these
screen.
Political tensions between the poor. This is an image of just one year ago. There were these. It must have been in the Italian newspapers as well. There were these demonstrations in Santiago. Again, I wouldn't say the same, but you know, much of the population the country has become, at least within Latin American terms, a very wealthy country, but there's still these sort of enormous differences between the poor and the rich. And this, not unlike the Allende government, which was a reaction again against the wealthy, and the reaction against it, this once again was you know, not at the same level of violence, but it was yet again a reaction against these social differences. So I think I'm gonna skip some of the other public spaces, other than to say that a lot of them, as you can see this one here, I'll go very quickly through them. I'm gonna be showing this space here, another one. They're all along the Mapocho River, basically the floodplain of the river. So they're all really determined by the landscape and the floodplain of the river. And as you can see, this is the Cerro Metropolitano. The big mountain park I showed you is also part of the topography. This is the Cerro Santa Lucia there. So you can see this is one of the parks along the river. It looks like that. And this is another one here, also along the river. It's fairly recent. I think it's actually really beautifully designed. You can see the river on the left here. And again, these mountains, it's actually looking to the east. So it's, did I say east? No, to the west. So this is the coastal mountain range. This is the park. Of course, not all public spaces in Santiago are determined by the topography, although once again, this is the space is slightly off the Alameda, and it's just a street which is full of restaurants, and it's very popular, as you can see. And lately, it's become very popular to close streets and allow them to become just pedestrian and cycle avenues. And this is bicycling new path created along the Mapocho River. Like most of the rivers in Chile, they come from the Andes. As you know, or have seen, the country is very narrow, so they're not big rivers. They're small rivers which run very fast for a very short period of time. And they're also very dependent on the snow of the Andes. So during the spring, the melting of the snow during the spring, there's a lot of water, and then during the summer and the end of the summer, there's practically no summer. So it's easy to think about these spaces of being flooded during the times when the snows are melting and being dry spaces used for public activities when it's not. And this idea was developed, the floodable parks was developed on this other river, which is called San Juan de la Guada. It's the lowest point in the Santiago Valley. This is a fairly new park as well. And it's called Victor Jara today. Victor Jara was a Chilean singer which was killed during the coup I showed. And this was traditionally the poorest area of Santiago. This is where the conditions were actually horrible because it would flood and nobody likes to live in a flooded area. So the poorest of the poor people lived here for the longest time. It's still a poor area today. But the park, you can see the idea of the park on the bottom. The yellow image is this longitudinal park, and it's a park along this floodable river. Most of the river was actually put in a tube which goes underground, and that wasn't enough to avoid the floods. So the floodable park goes over some of the pipes which run down below. So you can see the park on the top image. The idea was to have a park, like a traditional park, and then it would flood when it flooded, when it rains really hard. These are the conditions. You can see poor people. I mean, it's the poor of the poorest of the poor. These are shacks. This kind of scene is very hard to find these days in Santiago. These images are from the 50s. As I mentioned before, the country has become much wealthier. There's still huge differences between the rich and the poor, but the poor are not as poor as this lady you can see there. And then the image to the right is relatively contemporary, and you can see that it still floods. So this the green line is the floodable river. You can see it's actually like a tube in itself, but it's a green tube or a tube which can be used as a park. And you can see some images. It's built now here. It's this image, the mural on the ground, is an homage to Victor Jara, the singer I was talking about. He was a very popular singer in the 70s and killed by the government, which deposed Allende in the 70s. So I think I could finish. Now it's an hour I've been speaking, right, Massimo? Maybe I should finish. I'll finish going fast through these images, which is another public space in Santiago. It's once again along the river. It's, however, in the wealthiest part of Santiago, just like the previous one. The San Juan de la Guada is in the poorest area. This one is in the wealthiest area of Santiago. It's designed once again by Teo Fernandez. And as you can see, it's very geometric to the side of the city, and then becomes more naturally designed to the other edge, the edge which, so this is the edge to the city and has a very geometrical pattern. And then this is the wealthy part of the city here. The high rise you see here, it's actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a heavily earthquake zone. And this tower is the tallest in South America, and it's quite a constructional feat because of the earthquakes. And then you can see to this other side, this is the Cerro San Cristobal, or the hill I've been showing all along, and it becomes very natural, and the park then merges with the hill. So these are contemporary images of the city, the Andes Mountains at the back. And again, it's actually after rain. Santiago is a very smoggy city because you saw the image of the valley. The fog stays in this valley, and it's very difficult for it to move out because of the mountains all around. So an image like the one I'm showing you is one I took about 5 years ago, and you can only take these after a rainy day or a few days after a rainy day when the smog has been cleared through the rain. So the Andes Mountains, the rock and the majesty, they're particularly high around Santiago. The majesty of these mountains, I think, are what defines or what has been the main element in trying to give identity to the city and the country, apart from trying to imitate European cities. It's the rock and the massiveness of it. I realized there's mountains in Switzerland and in the north of Italy, for that matter, but the heights are very different, and the landscape is actually very rough. And so it's this roughness which I think has tended to define not just some of the landscapes, but also some of the architecture, and this is what I'm going to finish with, particularly in the last few years. And Claudia was making reference to Chilean architecture and the Chilean Biennale having become sort of quite well known around the world. And I think it's in part because it started finding its own voice. So what you're looking at here is a restaurant at the end of the park I was showing earlier on. It's by Smiljan Radic, which has become an internationally really well-known Chilean architect. And he's been using rocks very much. For those of you, in Europe, he became famous because one of the Serpentine pavilions was built. It's this installations in England you're probably familiar with, right? Not necessarily Smiljan's, but he got to design one of them, which I'll show right here. The one on the right is Smiljan's pavilion, and to the left is the Venice Biennale. But you can see the rock, the idea of the mountains or pieces of the mountains influencing his architecture. And then this actually, in my view at least, starts with a landscape architect called Carlos Martner, which was a professor in my school who designed these swimming pools and many landscapes. This one is on top of the Cerro San Cristobal. I think it's a very beautiful landscape. And again, you can see the influence of the mountains on the design of the sort of this pool. You can see the pool here. And it's also made with the rocks of the mountain itself. You've probably Pizza van Elrichhausen has become another sort of really well-known, international well-known Chilean firm. You can see the simplicity and the massiveness. For some people, this might be just another minimalist trend, but I think in Chile it acquires a different meaning. At least from my point of view, I can see the roughness and the majesty of the mountains behind the forms. And of course, Claudia mentioned Alejandro Aravena in relation to the Biennale, because he set up one of the Biennales. He was the leader of one of the Biennales. And here you can see a house he designed not a long time ago. And again, you might disagree with me, but I see it's a very simple, very majestic, and very rough architecture all at the same time. And at least I see the mountains and the Chilean sort of landscape in the work. So you can see the house here. This house in particular seems to me sort of an abstraction of the rocks and the mountains. And you can see another building of his, which is at the Catholic University. I have a little video of him here, but I'm not going to show it, speaking about the simplicity of his architecture as a response to the roughness, the fact that construction in Chile doesn't have the sophistication you'd find in Japan or Europe. But rather than seeing this as it used to be seen in the past, in the very recent past, I would say, as inferior to Europe, has been suddenly seen as a virtue, as the roughness and the simplicity as something which expresses the essence of what the country is. There's a certain roughness to the landscape, or a big roughness to the landscape, and there's a simplicity to it at the same time, and there's the earthquakes, which are very much part of the landscape, and giving birth to this type of architecture. And this is where I'll finish. I don't want to. Sorry, I don't want to show him. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you very much.